This is part 4 of the mini-series entitled Blueprints of the Anglo-Dutch Empire. If you haven't watched the first 3 parts, I recommend you to watch them first before continuing. Thank you very much, but I will continue here. The Anglo-Dutch Empire. It was a system that worked well for the Dutch aristocracy and the British aristocracy, and for the two royal blood, German royal bloodlines, the Hanovers and the Orange Nassaus, especially for the last two. But as you understand, not everyone was happy with this Anglo-Dutch empire that was going on. And remarkably, it's their own people that inhabited what we would call the 13 colonies. They were the ones that angered against the Anglo-Dutch Empire. Remember, yet a lot of the Dutch here also a lot of Ashkenazi Jews, or Khazars, whatever term you prefer. And here's, I want to mention one thing. The Khazars or Ashkenazi Jews, they were hated in Europe. They often couldn't get jobs, they couldn't get spouses outside of their own ethnicity. So the place where they could flourish was in merchandise. So many of them went to New Amsterdam, which later became New York. And that's why till this day, Jews are the majority they're the dominant, with majority, they're the majority in the dominant influence of banking. Many banks are Jews and many money lenders are Jews. Does it mean that there's a conspiracy of Jews want to take over the world? Look, merchandise, which also translated in banking, was kind of the only profession they were permitted into. Similar things happened in Asia, but there it was the Chinese. In every part of the world throughout history, you had a minority group, and they were entrusted with things as business and banking, which were sensitive professions that the native population didn't want to get involved in. And they were often blamed when things went wrong. In Asian times and also in modern times, it's the Chinese. And till recently in the 1970s, you had violent and bloody, bloody revolts against the Chinese middle class in Southeast Asia because they were blamed for the economic troubles. Also because in banking and in business in Southeast Asia, Chinese were number one. Well, for the West, the Ashkenazi Jews were number one in banking and in merchandise. Kind of the fault of the native Europeans themselves, but okay, I just want to explain that. So I don't want any comments about Jews wanting to take over or anti-Semite comments, okay? I don't want that crap in my comment section, so that's why I explained the history of how it developed. And again, I'm not saying that there are no conspiracies in the banking industry. Of course there are, as in any profession. But that's a whole nother subject. Look, the white population grew, and around the 18th century there were about 2 million of them in the 13 colonies. The colonies were big, they were quite expensive for Great Britain. And not only that, the Hanover household, they didn't manage the British Empire well. Or let me say it in plain language, they sucked at managing their empire. And George III was the third king of the Hanover household. And he took over Canada from the French. And here's the thing, King George III was also entitled the King of France. I don't want to be too distracted from the subject, but France was a contested region. In the early Middle Ages, the King of England was also the King of France. Later, the French also had their king, their household, but he was not recognized internationally. So you still had the English managing the western shores of France, while the King of France managed the inward lands. So it was a kind of messed up situation. The French nevertheless managed to establish colonies in around the Great Lakes area, but the British They didn't accept it. They still claimed France as their own possession, so the French had to give up and leave. Nevertheless, you had a colonist French population and a lot of Indians that learned French. They received Quebec as a province by the British, and because they were wealthy people. So King George didn't want to lose wealthy people. Okay? Here's the thing. This George over here, he bankrupted Great Britain. So Great Britain wasn't that great at all. And here's the thing, in those colonies, the governor was appointed by the German king. He was assisted by the navy and by patrols who were often German officers. And you had um, British aristocrats and also German and Dutch aristocrats that owned land throughout the colonies. And you also had from the, yeah, I won't call native white population, but from the whites that grew up over here for generations, you also had some of them that became wealthy and owned land. So they became the economic power of these 13 colonies, and they were a source of income for Great Britain. They also had to pay a lot of taxes. But understand this, the method of government they had were a Republican democracy. They had a democracy model based upon the ancient Greeks. So in cities, you had voting. All men. I'm not sure if it was obliged, but all men could vote about the affairs of their city. But it was not a democracy as if the whole colony was democratically governed. No. But in cities, you had democracy, just like with the ancient Greeks, based on the Republican model of the ancient Romans also. So, and the British had forts to govern the interests, not of the native population, but of the landowners and the British and German and Dutch aristocracy. But the common white people living here, they were extorted, they were put in indenture camps. I just call it as they were, those indenture camps were concentration camps. If people couldn't pay the amount of taxes demanded, it became debt onto them. If they didn't pay the debt in a certain amount of time, they would end up in indenture camps. Or they would be sent to prison, have to perform slave labor. And here's another thing. Most people here spoke English, while the government often spoke German. Of course, you also spoke English domestically, but I also had a lot of German officers, as I mentioned before, coming all the way from Europe that to have service over here. So not only do you have what you would call police brutality, well, they don't call them the police at the time, they were patrols, but you had, I would say, patrol brutality against their own white people, but also after they didn't even speak their own language. So after a while, the people here became tired of it, especially when King George and his agents in what they called the New World wanted to unite all the 13 colonies and make one big colony of it. By this would increase the taxation upon everyone, and nobody wanted that to happen. And of course, they also had no representation in the British Parliament, which was kind of strange. Even Ireland, which was treated racially inferior, had representatives in London. So the people here, they lived 1 month apart in travel time from Britain. They didn't want all of this. They didn't want all the patrol brutality, or in today's language, police brutality. They didn't want all that extortion, so they began to riot in the late 18th century. This was a big concern to the Hanovers and also to the Orange-Nassaus. So the Orange-Nassau family, they pressured the Hanovers to do something about this. And the French, the French were really tired of the claim of the British upon France. They began to mingle into this into these riots also. There were violent riots throughout the colonies, and it got out of control. The violence also turned against the landowner, British landowners, against the aristocracy that were living over there. And the Indians, well, they kind of tolerated the white men's problems. They had a lot of patience with those people that settled over there. But then you had the Treaty of Paris. I'm not going to legally into the Treaty of Paris, but it basically comes down to that the British Parliament, I guess under the initiative of this guy over here, and by the way, even there are historians that claim that this guy was mentally ill. Well, I cannot confirm that. And anyway, he did mismanage his kingdom and his empire, that's for sure. With the Treaty of Paris, they granted fishing rights and free economic activity for all people of the 13 colonies. They acknowledged each 13 colony as a sovereign state. King George and his heirs, the handovers, withdrew their claims upon the governments of the 13 colonies and upon the territories. But there were conditions. The British, the landowners from Europe, the aristocracy, they would be protected. All economic agreements before the Treaty of Paris would be honored. That also includes taxation and all of that, all of those things. And, well, there would be peace between the two countries. Just look at the Treaty of Paris yourself. You can Google it, Treaty of Paris, 1783. And, well, here's a big problem with the Treaty of Paris. You had no United States. And the treaty says the said United States. Well, I'm not going deep into the legal aspect, but let's say in media, people say there's an alleged killing or an alleged shooting. If in the media today, I'm talking about mainstream media, and you use the word alleged, it means that they are not certain. If there's an alleged shooting or an alleged terror attack, it means they receive a report that an attack happened, but they can't confirm it, or it may be BS. Well, in that time you had the said United States. It's kind of the same thing. Not really, it's kind of the same thing, that they were acknowledging all the 13 colonies as the United States. But here's the thing. The handovers already wanted to unite all the colonies and make them one administration, but it failed. And now they were treating them all as one country, even though there was no country, there was no unity yet. So after 1783, and by the way, there were no official diplomats from the British people or the white people over here that went to Paris to negotiate about the treaty, because there was no country, so you had no official diplomats. There was not even a head of state. Normally, if a region separates and becomes independent, the new head of state or the new elite sends their diplomats to arrange the independence, the acknowledgement. That was not the case over here. But now there was a Treaty of Paris. They got all this lavish rights in the east of North America, because, okay, where's the other map? Because the rest was still governed by Spain. But there was no country. So now after 1783, they had to make efforts to build a country that was called the United States, and they did it. In 1787, they came with a draft for a constitution, and the constitution had amendments, not articles. And understand this. An amendment is when there was a relationship that went wrong and now you want to restore the relationship. And in the Treaty of Paris, the goal of the Treaty of Paris, it states clearly, was to restore the relationships between King George and his country and the people of the said United States, or the alleged United States. All right? So that's why in the Constitution you have amendments, not articles. You go to any country in the world, when you read their Constitution, most of the time you have articles, Article 1, Article 2, with clauses in it. America has amendments because it was to restore a relationship. And in the First Amendment, you have the right to bear arms. I mean, and is that stated? That has to do because at the time you had no solid state structure that was there to defend what would be the American people. The British still had their forts and their military camps over here. And there were still German officers here at the time. So in 1789, what would be the American Constitution was ratified, and the House of Orange-Nassau acknowledged the USA, Spain, France, and also the Hanover House acknowledged it. But, well, I'm not into conspiracy theories, but the white people here, they fought for their country a lot. Now, not really, forgive me, they fought against what they saw as unfair treatment, against oppression, and they got a country as a consequence. But it was not really united. They had what happened. The government structures of the 13 colonies were transformed into, they removed the British flag, and they removed statues of King George and the Hanovers, and now they put statues of military agents of the white people over here, and they put the American, I've mentioned before, they put the American flag, and they removed the crowns, and it was a republic now. Not a democracy. The local democracies remained, but it was not a democracy. So within 5 years, they've built a new country. But here's the thing. That new country was born out of desperation, out of anger, out of frustration, and out of resistance. So what was established was a blueprint of violence. And more about that I'll speak in the coming parts.